I never thought a few extra pounds on an electricity bill could make 3 people look at me like I had betrayed them. One minute we were just 4 young adults sharing a flat in London, trying to survive our 20s, and the next they were staring at me like I had secretly been taking money from them for months. The worst part was that I genuinely believed I was being fair. So how did a handful of pounds on an energy bill turn our flat into a battlefield? The truth is, the argument didn't start that night. It started months earlier, long before the accusations, long before the tension, long before I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen at midnight, wondering if I had somehow become the villain in someone else's story. At the beginning of 2025, moving into that flat felt like the start of real independence. I was 22 and had just moved out of my parents' house in Manchester. Living in London suddenly felt like adulthood had officially begun. Rent was high, the city was chaotic, but sharing a place with friends made it manageable. There were 4 of us living there. Me, another girl named Chloe who was 21, a guy named Ryan who was also 21, and the youngest, Mia, who had just turned 20. None of us had much money. We were all working part-time or studying, trying to figure out what we were doing with our lives. The flat itself wasn't glamorous. It was a slightly worn 2-bedroom place above a small shop, with thin walls and a tiny kitchen. But when we first moved in, it felt perfect. On the first night, we sat around a small dining table that looked like it had survived at least 3 previous tenants. We had takeaway boxes, cheap wine, and a lot of excitement. We agreed on a few basic rules. Rent and utilities would go through me. Everyone would transfer their share at the start of the month, and I would handle paying the landlord and all the bills. It made sense because the contracts for the electricity and internet were already under my name. Everything else the flat needed, things like kitchen supplies, toilet paper, cleaning products, we would either split or take turns buying. And most importantly, we said that decisions about shared costs would involve everyone. At least, that was the plan. For the first couple of months, things worked well enough. Not perfect, but good enough that none of us complained. But gradually, something strange started happening. Whenever anything needed to be handled, somehow, it became my responsibility. It started with small things. One evening, Ryan was playing a game on his laptop in the living room when he suddenly groaned. "The Wi-Fi here is terrible," he said.
I looked up from my phone and shrugged. "Yeah, I noticed it's slow sometimes." From the kitchen, Chloe said, "Maybe we should change providers." Then she added, almost casually, "Can you check that?"
I remember looking at her, slightly confused. "Me? Well, the internet account is in your name," she said. That was the moment it began. I told them I'd look into it. At the time, it seemed like a simple task, but what I thought would take 15 minutes turned into hours. I spent an entire evening researching broadband providers in our area, comparing speeds, reading reviews, checking if the building supported fiber, calling customer service lines, trying to figure out installation times that wouldn't interrupt anyone's schedules. Throughout the process, I kept asking them what they preferred. "What speed do you guys want? Do you care if this one costs a few pounds more?" The answers were always the same. "Whatever you think." "Up to you. You're already looking into it." So eventually I made the decision. I switched providers. A technician came a few days later. I had to rearrange my work shift to be home for the installation. I stayed there while he set everything up, tested the connection, and made sure it worked. For about 2 days, nobody mentioned it. Then one evening, Ryan walked into the living room and said, The Wi-Fi still feels kind of slow. No thank you. No appreciation. Just another complaint. I felt a small flash of irritation, but I ignored it. Maybe the router was the problem. So the next evening I spent another hour researching routers. I went to an electronics shop, bought a better one, brought it home, and installed it myself. Once again, nobody helped. Nobody even asked what I was doing. And once again, there was no thank you. The same pattern kept repeating. If something in the flat ran out, someone would message me like I was some kind of household assistant. Hey, we're out of toilet paper. Can you grab dish soap? We need bin bags. At first I assumed we'd split the cost afterward, but somehow it always went the same way. They would tell me what the flat needed. I would go buy it. Then I'd tell them how much they owed me. And sometimes that's when the arguments began. One time I bought paper towels and cleaning spray. When I mentioned the total, Chloe said, I don't really use paper towels, though. I looked at her. You live here? Yeah, but I mostly use my own cloths. Everyone used them occasionally. It was a shared household. But suddenly it became a debate about whether she should contribute. Another time it was kitchen equipment. When we moved in, we barely had any cookware. I bought a couple of frying pans and a saucepan.
When I added that to the shared expenses, Ryan said, I don't cook that often, so I don't think I should pay for that.
Every single purchase somehow turned into a negotiation. Meanwhile, I was the one doing all the work. Shopping, tracking expenses, paying the bills, calling companies when something broke. Everything. The strangest part was that they never even pretended to want the responsibility. At one point I said, if someone else wants to manage the bills, we can switch. They immediately rejected the idea. No, you're doing great. You've already got it organized. It's easier this way. It sounded like praise, but it didn't feel like it. Because what they really meant was that they didn't want to deal with it. Months passed like that. Whenever something broke, I fixed it. Whenever a bill arrived, I paid it. Whenever there was a problem, somehow it became my job to solve it. And slowly, without realizing it, I started feeling less like a flatmate and more like the unpaid manager of the entire household. The moment that pushed me over the edge happened late one night. I was sitting at the kitchen table looking at our electricity bill. Energy prices in the UK fluctuate every month depending on usage. Some months it was lower. Some months it spiked. That month it came to about £200. I stared at the number for a long time. Then I opened the notebook where I tracked all our household expenses. That was when the idea crossed my mind. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to cheat anyone. But because I realized something simple. They were benefiting from all the work I was doing while contributing almost nothing to the process. I managed the bills. I researched service providers. I handled customer support. Everything was under my name. If something went wrong with the accounts, it would affect me, not them. So I did a quick calculation. If the bill was £200, splitting it evenly would be £50 each. But instead of asking for £50, I asked for £55. Just £5 extra. £5. Not a huge fee. Just enough that my time and effort didn't feel completely invisible. I honestly believed it was fair. I even thought they might not notice. But they did notice. And the night they did, everything in the flat changed instantly. It was a quiet weekday evening. Nothing dramatic at first. Someone was scrolling through their phone on the sofa. Someone else was making instant noodles. The television was playing quietly in the background. I sent the monthly message in our group chat. Electricity was £200 this month. Everyone's share is £55. Normally, someone would send a thumbs up emoji, and then the money would slowly arrive over the next day or two. But this time, the replies came almost immediately. Ryan sent the first message. Wait, why £55? A few seconds later, Mia replied, shouldn't it be £50 each? I felt a tight knot forming in my chest. I had expected the question, but seeing it written there still made my stomach twist. I typed carefully. It's just a little extra to cover the time I spend handling the bills and organizing everything. The typing bubbles appeared instantly. Then Ryan replied, "So you're charging us?" The tone had already changed. Before I could respond, Chloe added another message. "You never said anything about a fee before." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to think of a way to explain it without starting a fight. Because I wasn't trying to start a war. I was just tired. Tired of solving problems nobody else wanted to deal with. Tired of feeling like the only responsible person in the flat. So I answered, honestly, "It's only a few pounds. I spend a lot of time dealing with the bills and organizing things for the house." There was a pause. Then Ryan walked out of his room and leaned against the kitchen counter with his phone in his hand. "Are you serious?" he asked. My heart sank. I hadn't realized the conversation was about to move from messages to a full confrontation in the kitchen. "What do you mean?" I asked. He held up his phone like it was evidence. "You're charging us extra for electricity." "I'm not charging you for electricity," I said calmly. "I added a few pounds because I handle all the bills." By then the other two had walked into the kitchen as well. Suddenly the conversation we had never planned to have was happening. Mia crossed her arms. That wasn't part of the agreement. Agreement. That word hit harder than I expected. Because technically, she was right. When we moved in, we had agreed to split bills evenly, but we had also agreed to share responsibilities. And that part had quietly disappeared. I looked at them. "None of you help with any of this," I said. "What do you mean?" Chloe asked. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because the question felt ridiculous. "The internet situation? I spent hours fixing that." Nobody replied. I researched providers, arranged the installation, bought the router, and dealt with customer service. Silence. "And every time the flat needs something, you all ask me to buy it," Chloe shrugged. "Well, yeah, you're already handling the bills." "That doesn't mean I agreed to manage the entire flat." Ryan shook his head. "That's just part of living together." That sentence made something snap inside me. "No," I said. "It's part of living together when everyone contributes." The room went quiet again. Then Mia said, "You never asked us to help." "I did," I replied, multiple times. Whenever I asked for opinions or help, they always said the same thing. "Whatever you think, you're already dealing with it. You're doing great." At the time, it sounded supportive. Now it just felt like they had dumped everything on me. "So you're charging us now?" Ryan asked again. "I added 5 pounds, I said slowly. 5. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" He sighed. "You can't just decide to start charging people." Charging. Like I had secretly installed a coin meter in the living room. I rubbed my temples. "You guys wanted me to handle everything." "No one forced you," Chloe said. That sentence felt like a slap. No one forced you. But if I hadn't handled those things, the problems would still exist. I took a breath. If someone else wants to take over the bills, I'm happy to stop. The offer hung in the air. No one answered, because deep down, they didn't want the responsibility. After a long silence, Mia said, "It just feels shady to add money without telling us first." Shady. That word burned. I had spent months making their lives easier, and suddenly I was the shady one. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. "You know what's actually shady?" I said quietly. They looked at me. "Treating someone like the flat manager and pretending it's normal." Nobody answered. Finally, Ryan pulled out his phone. "Whatever. I'll send 50 pounds. The others nodded. Same. I didn't argue. I just sat there while they went back to their rooms, like the conversation had never mattered. But the flat felt different after that. Colder. Quieter. And as I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, one question kept repeating in my mind. Had I crossed a line? Or had I finally stopped letting people walk all over me. Over the next few days, the atmosphere stayed tense. Nobody started another argument, but things were awkward. People stopped hanging out in the kitchen. The group chat became quiet except for simple messages like, "Bin day tomorrow," or "Parcel arrived." One afternoon, I walked into the living room and heard them talking quietly. When they saw me, the conversation stopped. My stomach dropped. Suddenly it felt like I had become the problem, not the imbalance, not the workload, me. Later that night, I overheard Chloe talking on the phone through the thin walls. I wasn't trying to listen, but one sentence carried down the hallway. "She's charging us for bills now." Charging. Again, that word. Like I had turned into a landlord. I sat on my bed staring at the wall and wondered if I had been wrong. Maybe I should have spoken to them first. Maybe I should have explained things differently. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the real issue was still there. None of them wanted responsibility. A few days later, something happened that made everything clear. It was Saturday morning. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when Ryan walked in with his laptop. "The Wi-Fi's acting up again," he said. Normally, I would have immediately said I'd check it, but this time, I just nodded. "Okay." He stood there, waiting for me to fix it. When I didn't move, he frowned. "Aren't you going to call them?" I blinked. "Why would I?" "Well, you handle the internet." That sentence made everything click. In their minds, I had become the flat's manager, not a roommate, a service. So I shrugged. "If the Wi-Fi isn't working, you can call them." He stared at me. "Do you have the account details?" I asked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. None of them even knew how the account worked, because they had never needed to know. They just complained. I finished my coffee. "If it's a provider issue, they'll fix it," I said. "The number's on their website." Then I walked away. For the first time since we moved in, I didn't feel responsible for solving the problem. And honestly, it felt strangely freeing. That weekend, the Wi-Fi stayed slow. No one called. No one researched anything. They just complained. On Sunday night, Ryan knocked on my door. "Hey." "Yeah?" "Can you call the internet company tomorrow?" "Why?" "Because you handle it." I shook my head. "If everyone thinks it's unfair that I get anything in return, then we should split responsibilities." He looked frustrated. "But you're good at it." I almost laughed. "You're good at it." It sounded like praise, but really it meant they didn't want to do it. "We can rotate responsibilities," I said. "Like what?" "Bills, internet issues, buying supplies." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't know how to do all that." Neither did I when we moved in. That ended the conversation. But over the next week, something interesting happened. People started doing small things themselves. Chloe bought toilet paper without telling me. Mia took out the bins without being asked. And 2 days later, Ryan actually called the internet provider. It took him nearly an hour. When he came back, he looked exhausted. "Customer service is awful," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." He sat on the sofa and rubbed his face. That took forever. For the first time, someone else had experienced the work I'd been quietly doing for months. The funny thing is, the argument about the £5 never came up again. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody paid it. But the dynamic in the flat slowly changed. Not dramatically, just small things. People doing their own part. People realizing that running a household takes effort. Sometimes late at night when the flat is quiet, I still think about that moment. Was I the villain for adding those £5? Or was I just the first person to realize something important? That being the responsible one doesn't mean you should carry everything forever. I still don't know the answer, so I'm curious. What do you think? If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have kept doing everything and said nothing? Or would you have drawn the line too? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about the strange lessons adulthood teaches us, make sure to subscribe.